Good evening, everybody. As President and Commander-in-Chief, my top priority, above all else, is the security of the United States and the safety of the American people. And that means preventing terrorist attacks, and at the moment, it is focused on making sure that we are dismantling and destroying the ISIL network. I just met with my National Security Council as part of our regular effort to review and constantly intensify our campaign against ISIL. And I want to thank Director Brennan and everybody here at the Central Intelligence Agency for hosting us and for their critical contributions to this fight. In late February, at our meeting at the State Department, I directed my team to continue accelerating this campaign on all fronts, and we have. This remains a difficult fight and a complex one, involving many countries and different communities in Syria and in Iraq. It is a military campaign and a counterterrorism effort, but it also depends on a whole range of political issues that face these two countries. As we've seen so tragically, from Brussels to Istanbul to Iraq, where ISIL slaughtered children watching soccer, these depraved terrorists still have the ability to inflict horrific violence on the innocent, to the revulsion of the entire world. With attacks like these, ISIL hopes to weaken our collective resolve. And once again, they have failed. Their barbarism only stiffens our unity and determination to wipe this vile terrorist organization off the face of the earth. Today, on the ground in Syria and in Iraq, ISIL is on the defensive. Our 66-member coalition, including Arab partners, is on the offensive. We have momentum, and we intend to keep that momentum. Our air campaign, more than 11,500 strikes so far, continues to pound ISIL targets. It's harder than ever for them to move and for their masses to, mass forces. When they try, we take them out. ISIL still has managed to advance in some areas of Syria and Iraq, but it has not had a single successful major offensive operation on the ground there since last summer. So it's been nearly a year since they were able to. We continue to take out their leaders, their commanders, and those plotting terrorist attacks. For ISIL's leadership, it has been a bad few months. Coalition forces captured Abu Dawood, a leader of its chemical weapons program, giving us critical information that's allowed us to unleash more strikes against those sites. We have removed Abu Sarah, ISIL financier in Iraq, Haji Iman, their finance chief, Izzat al-Jabouri, an ISIL figure in northern Iraq, not to mention a number of top foreign terrorist fighters. They are off the field. And in the days and weeks ahead, we intend to take out more. Every day, ISIL leaders wake up and understand that it could be their last. With coalition support, local forces continue to push ISIL back in Iraq. In Anbar province, Iraqi forces have consolidated their gains around Ramadi and pushed up the Euphrates River Valley, liberating several villages from ISIL and retaking parts of the town of Heat. In a recent offensive in the Tigris River Valley, Iraqi forces have pushed towards Mosul. And as Secretary Kerry made clear in his visit to Baghdad last week, we will continue to assist Iraq, and so must the entire world, as it works to stabilize liberated areas and promote governance and development that is inclusive of all Iraqi communities so that ISIL cannot return. Meanwhile, in Syria, a coalition of local forces, some backed by U.S. Special Operations Forces, continue to make progress, pushing ISIL out of the strategic town of al-Shadidi. ISIL was dug in there, and that battle was expected to last several weeks. Instead, ISIL was defeated in several days. With this, we've severed a critical supply line between ISIL strongholds of Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq, tightening the squeeze on ISIL in both areas. In this offensive alone, these local forces in Syria have pushed ISIL out of about 2,800 square miles. In the north, fighting continues as local forces fight to eject ISIL from its last pocket along the border with Turkey. In other words, the ISIL core in Syria and Iraq continues to shrink. The ranks of fighters are estimated to be at the lowest levels in about 2 years, and more of them are realizing that their cause is lost. Our cyber operations are disrupting their command and control and communications. We continue to target ISIL's financial infrastructure, including its oil wells, refineries, and supply lines. We've reduced their oil production and their oil revenue, and every dollar we deny them means one less dollar to pay their fighters and to fund their terror. As I've said repeatedly, the only way to truly destroy ISIL is to end the Syrian civil war that ISIL has exploited. So we continue to work for a diplomatic end to this awful conflict. The cessation of hostilities in the Syrian civil war has largely held for about 6 weeks. It has reduced the violence, although not eliminated it. But that reduction is meaningful, and it's allowed some humanitarian aid to reach the Syrian people. So the cessation has saved lives, but as we're seeing around Aleppo and other areas, the cessation is tenuous and under strain. We've seen repeated violations by the Assad regime, continued attacks by al-Qaeda's al-Nusra affiliate, and many Syrians continue to be deprived of desperately needed food, water, and medicine. Talks are now resuming in Geneva, and the United States will continue to do everything that we can to help the cessation succeed and to advance a political solution to the Syrian civil war. And that includes a vision endorsed by the UN Security Council, including Russia, a process that brings all Syrians together under a transitional governing body, a new constitution, and free elections. The United States recognizes, as do people all across Syria, that such a process must include a transition away from Assad. And the future of Syria will be on the agenda when I meet with our Gulf Cooperation Council partners next week in Saudi Arabia. Beyond Syria and Iraq, we continue to go after ISIL wherever it tries to rear its ugly head. We're helping partners strengthen their security forces from Africa to Afghanistan. As we, our allies and partners, have made it harder for foreign terrorists to reach Syria and Iraq, we've seen an uptick in the number of ISIL fighters heading to Libya. So we're going to continue to use the full range of our tools to roll ISIL back from Libya while assisting the new and nascent Libyan government as it works to secure their country. I do want to point out that even as we work to destroy ISIL, we continue to go after the remnants of al-Qaeda that still pose a significant threat to U.S. interests, our allies, and the homeland. In Syria, we targeted a senior leader of al-Nusra, Abdul Faras al-Suri. In another strike in Syria, we took out 5 other al-Qaeda operatives. In Yemen, our recent strike against a training camp used by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula took out dozens of terrorist fighters. In Somalia, we took out a senior leader of al-Shabaab, Hassan al-Dori, who was responsible for the attacks that killed innocent civilians, including Americans. So once again, we're sending a message. If you target Americans, you have no safe haven. We will find you. And finally, we will continue to work closely with our allies and partners, including in Europe, to stem the flow of foreign terrorist fighters and prevent attacks. I want to point out that our intelligence professionals and those of other nations have stopped numerous terrorist operatives in Syria and Iraq from entering Europe, thereby preventing attacks and gaining valuable intelligence. The world does not always hear about the success of our intelligence services, but it's a testament to the skills and tireless efforts of our intelligence professionals, and I want to make sure that the world does not forget it. Our team of experts, surge teams, recently returned from Brussels and Athens, and we're going to be sending teams to other countries so that we keep improving border security and screening of travelers and share more information. Because even the smallest gap, when critical information is not shared or when a potential terrorist slips through the cracks, can be deadly. And building on my invitation at our Nuclear Security Summit, we're going to continue to look for ways for intelligence services around the world to share more information against terrorist threats. So it's appropriate that we're here today. It gives me a chance to thank all the dedicated men and women across the CIA and our intelligence community, as well as every level of federal, state, and local government agencies who are involved in this effort They are working around the clock to keep us safe. They don't get a lot of attention, but their work is tough and it is critical, and I rely on it, and everybody up here relies on it in order to make informed decisions and to protect the American people. As the stars on the memorial wall here attest, many have given their lives so that we can live free. We're safer because of their patriotic service. And tomorrow, my National Security Advisor, Susan Rice, will address all the elements of our comprehensive strategy to destroy ISIL. That includes working with partners around the world to counter ISIL's hateful ideology, as well as protecting our homeland and working with communities here at home so that we stay resilient. In closing, I want to note that we're about to mark the 3 years since the bombing of the Boston Marathon. And once again, we'll remember the lives we lost and the survivors who continue to recover, to walk, and in many cases to run again. And I just want to remind the American people once again of what Boston taught us: how to be strong, how to be resilient. In the face of terrorists who try to spread panic, we have to refuse to give in to fear. We have to stay true to our values of liberty and diversity and openness. In the face of madmen who only know how to kill, we're going to keep on living our lives and trying to lift people up. We go to our stadiums, we cheer for our teams, we thrive in our cities, we run our races, as they will next week in Boston. In other words, we carry on. Terrorists like ISIL and Al-Qaeda, they can't destroy a great nation like the United States of America. I spent time before I came here at a science fair at the White House. You want to get a sense of why I'm always confident about America. Meet some of those young people and what they're creating, what they're inventing, the diseases they're trying to cure, the energy they're trying to generate, the hope that they want to bring and the light they want to shine to the entire world. That's who we are. You can't beat that. Across more than 200 years, we've prevailed over much greater threats than the one we pose now. So we are focused, and we are going to win, in large part because of outstanding work of individuals who are here today. But we should be confident about how effective not only our military and our intelligence and our diplomatic teams are, but the basic character of the American people. As long as we hold to that, we're going to be just fine. Thank you very much, everybody. Hey! Good to see you. All right, everybody have a seat, have a seat. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the White House. There are a lot of good things about being president. You know, I get a chance to travel all across the country and meet people and see all the amazing things that are being done. Being Commander-in-Chief of the greatest military the world's ever known and seeing the incredible service of our men and women in uniform, Air Force One is very cool. I don't have to take off my shoes before I get on an airplane. But some of the best moments that I've had as president have involved science and our annual science fair. I mean, I have shot a marshmallow out of a cannon directly under Lincoln's portrait. I've learned about prototypes from 6-year-old Girl Scouts who built a page-turning machine out of Legos for people who might be disabled. There they are. Good to see you guys. I should add, by the way, that I took a picture with them with one of their tiaras on, which I think is still floating around the internet. Most importantly, I've just been able to see the unbelievable ingenuity and passion and curiosity and brain power of America's next generation and all the cool things that they do. I've also, by the way, had a chance to see an alarming number of robots. None have caused me any harm up until now. They've startled me a little bit. I understand today that we have a live chicken here, which I'm sure the White House staff is thrilled about. But this is fun. More importantly, it speaks to what makes America the greatest country on earth. I want to publicly thank some of the people who helped make today possible. Also because I want you to know who to blame if something explodes. We've got some members of Congress in the House who've been highly supportive of all our science and basic research efforts. We've got my science advisor, John Holdren, who is here. Give John a big round of applause. We've got my Chief Technology Officer, Megan Smith, in the House. We have some guests who are really helping to lift up the importance of science, like this is not a typical combination, supermodel and supercoder. Carly Kloss is here. We've got actress and science enthusiast Yara Shahidi. There she is. Good to see you. We've got XKCD comic creator Randall Monroe is here. Give him a big round of applause. We're joined by some of the past participants of our science fairs, including Elena Simone, who studied her own cancer and started coming up with some cures. I remember meeting you last year. How's Harvard going? So far, so good. She was a senior last year, just started. So this is an eclectic and diverse bunch, but what they all share is this love of science and love of technology and a belief that our youngest innovators can change the world. And there's nothing that makes me more hopeful about the future than seeing young people like the ones who are here, and they come from all over the country. They come in all shapes and sizes. All of you are showing the rest of us that it's never too early in life to make a difference. You teach us about the power of reason and logic and trying things and figuring out whether they work, and if they don't, learning from that and trying something new. And you remind us that together, through science, we can tackle some of the biggest challenges that we face. Whether you're fighting cancer or combating climate change, feeding the world, writing code that leads to social change, you are sharing in this essential spirit of discovery that America's built on. John Holdren helpfully reminded me that today happens to be the 273rd birthday of Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was obviously a pretty good writer. The Declaration of Independence turned out pretty well. He was a great political thinker and a great president, but he was also a scientist. And that was true of most of our founders. They were children of the Enlightenment. They had come of age when all the old dogmas were being challenged, and they had this incredible faith, this belief in the human mind and our ability to figure stuff out. And whether it is Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson or all the others who were involved in the founding of our country, one of the essential elements that is embedded in our Constitution and the design of this democracy is this belief that the power of the human brain, when applied to the world around us, can do amazing, remarkable things. And it also requires, as we're seeing from these outstanding teams, not just constant inquiry, but also strong teamwork and dogged perseverance. And by following the trail of your curiosity wherever it takes you, you are continually adding to this body of knowledge that helps make us a more secure, more prosperous, and more hopeful society. Science has always been the hallmark of American progress. It's the key to our economic success. I can't think of a more exciting time for American science than right now, because we are busy reigniting that spirit of innovation to meet so many challenges. Just to give you a couple examples, we're on the cusp of a new era of medicine that accounts for people's individual genes. And I've been doing a lot of work with Francis Collins, the head of NIH, around how we take the human genome that we've mapped, in part thanks to the good work of Francis and others, so that we are able to not just cure diseases generally, but figure out what exactly do you in your particular body need in order to keep it running well. We're harnessing technology to develop cleaner sources of energy and save our planet in the process. We're unraveling the mysteries of the human brain, unlocking secrets of the universe. In fact, just last month, Commander Scott Kelly returned from an almost year-long stay on the International Space Station. Some of you may have read about that. He conducted countless experiments, and he also served as an experiment himself. His identical twin brother, Mark, who is an astronaut as well, Mark stayed home during this entire time that Scott was up in the air, and that meant that NASA could study the two of them side by side to gain insights into how long-term occupation in space changes your body and your operating systems. It turned out initially it makes you 2 inches taller. But I saw Mark just 2 weekends ago. Apparently you shrink back really quickly. It makes your head bigger too, but I don't know how big. America's also got a selfie-taking rover that's Instagramming from Mars. The International Space Station just got its first inflatable habitat for astronauts. SpaceX, and on the commercial private venture side of space, just landed a returning rocket on a drone ship in the middle of the ocean. And that's opening up the possibility of reusing our rockets instead of just throwing them away once they've launched. So the progress we're seeing across the board is extraordinary, and it's just the beginning. The rest is going to be up to you, the next generation. Somewhere in your generation, maybe in this room, are pioneers who are going to be the first to set their foot on Mars. The first humans, anyway. I don't know about other life forms. And I know what you're capable of because I just had a chance to see some of the exhibits, and we had some of the press pool follow. If you were not blown away from some of the young people that we just had a chance to meet, then you had too big of a lunch and you were falling asleep, because if you were paying attention, it was unbelievable. We've got Maya Varma, who's a senior from San Jose, California. Where's Maya? Yay, there's Maya. Maya's using a low-cost microcontroller, software freely available on the internet, and a smartphone, and she designed a tool that allows people with asthma and other lung diseases to diagnose and monitor their own symptoms. So her goal was to use smartphone technology to make diagnostic tests for all kinds of diseases a lot cheaper. My aspiration is not only to create the next big thing in my field one day, Maya says, but also to make it accessible to more than a privileged few in the world. So give Maya a big round of applause. I do have to say, this is just an aside. The only problem with the science fair is it makes me feel a little inadequate. Because I think back to my high school, and first of all, I didn't have a field. Maya talked about her field. My field, I don't know exactly what my field of study was at that time, but it wasn't that. We also have 9-year-old Jacob Leggett from Baltimore. Where's Jacob? There you go in the bow tie. So Jacob loved programming ever since the age of 2, when he nearly wiped clean his grandma's computer, which I'm sure she was thrilled with, but don't worry, Jacob fixed it. Last summer, this young maker wrote to a company that manufactures 3D printers, asked him if he could have one of the 3D printers in exchange for feedback on whether their printers are kid-friendly. So clearly he's a good negotiator and business person. And today, Jacob is churning out toys and games for himself and his little sister, and he dreams one day of making artificial organs for people. I should add, by the way, Jacob, John, had a very good idea, which is that we should have, in addition to our PCAST, which is my science advisory group, all these scientists and leaders in various fields, we should have a kids advisory group that starts explaining to us what's interesting to them and what's working and could help us shape advances in STEM education. Anyway, that was Jacob's idea. So, way to go, Jacob. We're going to follow up on that. Give Jacob a round of applause. We have 16-year-old Anirudh Ganeshan. Where's Anirudh? There he is, right there. So, when Anirudh was little, his grandparents walked him 10 miles to a remote clinic in his native India for vaccinations, only to find out that the vaccines had spoiled in the heat. Though he eventually got the shots that he needed, he thought, well, this is a problem, and wanted to prevent other children from facing the same risk. So he developed what he calls the VaxWagon, and it's a refrigerator on wheels that transports vaccines to remote destinations. That's the kind of innovation and compassion that we're seeing from so many of these young people. So give Anirudh a big round of applause. And we have Olivia Hennessy, a high school senior from Greenwich, Connecticut. Where is Olivia? There she is. Hi, Olivia. And now, think about this. So Olivia swept the Google Science Fair. She read about the Ebola epidemic in the news. She decides, I want to make a faster, less expensive test for the disease. As opposed to a lot of adults who were just thinking, how do I avoid getting Ebola? She decides, well, I'm going to fix this. So she wants a faster, less expensive test. An old test cost $1,000, took up to 12 hours to conduct. Using silk as a base instead, Olivia made the test cost $5 without requiring refrigeration, with results that are available in under 30 minutes. How about, what were you doing in high school? Give Olivia a big round of applause. So this is just a small sample of the incredible talent that is on display at this science fair. And we couldn't be prouder. To all the students, to all the young people, we could not be prouder of you. I want to thank the parents and the teachers and mentors who stood behind these young people, encouraged them to pursue their dreams. I asked all the young people who I had a chance to meet, how did you get interested in this? And there were a couple whose parents were in the sciences, but for the majority of them, there was a teacher, a mentor, a program, something that just got them hooked. And it's a reminder that science is not something that is out of reach. It's not just for the few, it's for the many, as long as it's something that we're weaving into our curriculum and it's something that we're valuing as a society. And so I hope that every company and every college and every community and every parent and every teacher joins us in encouraging this next generation of students to actively engage and pursue science and push the boundaries of what's possible. We've got to give all of our young people the tools that they need to explore and discover and to dig their hands in stuff and experiment and invent and uncover something new and try things and see hypotheses or experiments fail and then learn how to extract some knowledge from things that didn't work as well as things that worked. That's another theme that came out of a lot of the conversations I had with young people. And that's why we're building on our efforts to bring hands-on computer science learning, for example, to all students. As I've said before, in the new economy, computer science isn't optional, it's a basic skill along with the 3 R's. So we're issuing new guidance to school districts for how they can better support computer science education. Oracle will invest in getting 125,000 more students into computer science classes. Give Oracle a big round of applause for that. We appreciate that. We've got more than 500 schools that are committing to expand access to computer science, and this is just a sample of the things that we've been putting together over the last several years to try to expand opportunity for the kind of brilliant work that's being done by these students. And we're seeing entire states take action. For example, last month, Rhode Island got on a path to bring computer science to every school within 2 years. So we're going to build on this progress. We want to make sure every single one of our students, no matter where they're from, what income their parents bring in, regardless of their backgrounds, we want to make sure that they've got access to hands-on science, technology, engineering, and math education that's going to set them up for success and keep our nation competitive in the 21st century. That includes, by the way, working through some of the structural biases that exist in science. A lot of them are unconscious, but the fact is that we've got to get more of our young women and minorities into science and technology, engineering and math and computer science. I've been really pleased to see the number of young women who've gotten more and more involved in our science fairs over the course of these last several years. And as I said to a group that I had a chance to meet with outside, we're not going to succeed if we got half the team on the bench, especially when it's the smarter half of the team. Our diversity is a strength, and we've got to leverage all of our talent in order to make ourselves as creative and solve as many problems as we can. And one of the things I find so inspiring about these young thinkers and makers is that they look at all these seemingly intractable problems as something that we can solve. There's a confidence when you are pursuing science. They don't consider age a barrier. They don't think, well, that's just the way things are. They're not afraid to try things and ask tough questions. And above all, what we've seen today is that they feel an obligation to use their gifts to do something not just for themselves but for other people as well. Olivia said after she was working on this Ebola diagnostic tool, "My generation's been raised with an awareness that we're part of a global community. It's everybody's responsibility to take a proactive approach and think of solutions." She is right. I want you to call up Congress and tell them your thinking on that. That was just a joke. Maybe not. But it's all up to us to work together with our youngest talent leading the way. A century ago, Albert Einstein predicted the existence of gravitational waves. This year, a team of scientists finally proved him right. This was very cool, by the way. I don't know if those of you guys who had a chance to read about this. The way they measured it was the building got a little longer. The building from which they were measuring this gravitational wave grew like a little bit. And then it kind of shrank back, which is really weird and really interesting. And that's the thing about science. You don't always cross the finish line yourself. You may have a hypothesis, a theory, and then people build off of it. And it's like you're running a race and you're passing a baton. Everything that we're working with today is based on some young person like you 10 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 or 300 years ago, who were asking themselves the same question. And while even Einstein didn't see all the fruits of his labor, because he went as far as his curiosity and hard work would take him, generations of scientists continue to build on his progress. So that's what we're going to need from all of you. We are counting on all of you to help build a brighter future and for you to use your talents to help your communities and your country and the world. We will be with you every step of the way, and I will be keenly following your progress so that when you invent some cancer cure or find some new source of cheap, clean energy, I will take some of the credit. I'll say, if it hadn't been for the White House Science Fair, who knows what might have happened. Even though it won't really be my credit to take. So I'm just teasing, guys. Thank you very much, everybody. Proud of you. Good job.
So good, a few minutes.
That's good, all right. All right, hold on a second. I gotta get my game face on. Wait, have you written your book yet?
I have not written my book.
Okay, that's good. Don't write your book until you win another chance. I love this. You guys got the little goggles? The Secret Service cleared this? Are we sure this is not going to explode? Is he pouring the whole? Let's just be before.
Yes.
I don't want like a story about Steph missed the Oklahoma City game because he burned his hand.
Should we test it?
It's like his fingers melted together and his career is over. Oh man, can you imagine? I'd be like the most unpopular guy in the country. That's a wonderful volcano.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
We did it.
Thanks, guys.
We have constructed a fairly rigid and vigorous set of criteria for us evaluating the intelligence that we receive about ISIL, where it might be operating, where al-Qaeda is operating. These guidelines involve a whole range of agencies consulting extensively and are then checked, double-checked, triple-checked before kinetic actions are taken. And for the most part, our actions are directed at high-value targets in the countries that you just described, outside of the theater of Iraq and Syria. In some cases, what we're seeing are camps that, after long periods of monitoring, becomes clear are involved in and directing plots that could do the United States harm, or are supporting ISIL activities or al-Qaeda activities elsewhere in the world. So if after a long period of observation we are seeing that, in fact, explosive materials are being loaded onto trucks and individuals are engaging in training in small arms, and there are some of those individuals who are identified as couriers for ISIL or al-Qaeda, then based on those evaluations, a strike will be taken. But what we have been very cautious about is making sure that we are not taking strikes in situations where, for example, we think there's the presence of women or children, or if it is in a normally populated area. And, you know, recently we laid out the criteria by which we're making these decisions. We declassified many elements of this. We are going to be putting forward and trying to institutionalize on a regular basis how we make these evaluations and these analyses. I think, in terms of the broader debate that's taken place, David. I think there's been, in the past, legitimate criticism that the architecture, the legal architecture around the use of drone strikes or other kinetic strikes wasn't as precise as it should have been, and there's no doubt that civilians were killed that shouldn't have been. I think that over the last several years, we have worked very hard to avoid and prevent those kinds of tragedies from taking place. In situations of war, we have to take responsibility when we're not acting appropriately, or where we've just made mistakes, even with the best of intentions. And that's what we're going to continue to try to do. And what I can say with great confidence is that our operating procedures are as rigorous as they have ever been, and that there is a constant evaluation of precisely what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Leahy. Thank you, members of the subcommittee. My name is Bono. I'm the co-founder of the One Campaign, and I'm just going to jump right into it because I've been told not to filibuster. And as you know, the Irish invented the filibuster. So I'm going to read this because that makes it faster. I've just returned from Africa and the Middle East, where I was lucky to join a Codel led by Senator Graham there. I visited Kenya, Jordan, and then with the team, Turkey and Egypt. This visit revealed one fact and two fictions. The fact is that aid can no longer be seen as charity, a nice thing to do when we can afford it. If there's one thing I would like you to take away from this testimony, it is that aid in 2016 is not charity, it is national security. And when it's structured properly with a hard focus on fighting corruption and improving governance to qualify for that aid, it could be the best bulwark we have against the violent extremism that is gaining traction in the Levant and the Sahel. The two fictions the expedition revealed to me were, number one, that this refugee problem is temporary. The typical crisis that creates refugees lasts 25 years. On our trip, Senator Graham and I heard the term permanent temporary solution thrown around, but without the irony that phrase requires. The second fiction is that it's simply a Middle Eastern problem. Refugees are flowing from all over the world, especially Africa, actually. Of the top 10 countries that are hosting refugees today, 5 of them are African. In Europe, the problem has moved from practical to existential. In 1989, the wall that divided Europe came down, a remarkable moment to live through. Who could imagine in 2016 another set of walls being built up? This time made of mesh and razor wire, but walls nevertheless. Members of the subcommittee, let me soberly suggest to you that the integration of Europe, the very idea of European unity, is at risk here. Europe is America's most important ally since the Second World War. Are we not your most important ally in the fight against violent extremism? This should really matter to you. I know it does. Put simply, as we Europeans have learned, if the Middle East catches fire, the flames jump any border controls. And if Africa fails, Europe cannot succeed. It's not rocket science, it's math. Here are the numbers. By 2050, the African population will have doubled to 2.5 billion, twice that of China. 40% of the world's youth will be African, which personally excites me because I have a sense of who they are and want to be. Of the One Campaign's 7 million members, 3 million of them are African. We have a sense of their potential as an engine of growth that can roar, but we also fear that if the young people of Africa are misled and marginalized, their anger could be channeled not to hope, but to hate. A choice is stark. We fast-track our friendship, or we invite new enemies. I know that you in this room believe deeply that freedom is more powerful than fear, that hope is more contagious than hate. And I know you'll agree with me when I say that sometimes hope needs a bit of help. Well, this is one of those times. You see, to defeat bad ideas, you need better ideas. But the good news is we have them. UNHCR have great ideas on how humanitarian support can be done better and provide jobs and hope. They witness how the mood of a camp changes if there's a classroom built for kids. They see the despair in the faces of skilled workers not allowed access to the labour market. But soberly, I have to say to you, the international community, though it means well, is having a lot of meetings about the crisis. And I believe it's issuing a record number of press releases. But what it's not doing is cutting checks. As of last month, as you kind of about to hear, the UN's humanitarian response plans for 2016 had only received 9% of the funding they require. 9%. And grants are handed out annually, which is kind of on a hand-to-mouth basis with no predictability, which makes it impossible for these agencies to plan, which is madness. It's absolute madness. Another idea that I heard that might be of serious interest to this committee is to prioritize the support of the countries along the Sahel and the Levant who are not yet in crisis. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive, but the people I met, especially the military, told us it is critical that these countries not only survive, but that they thrive. Imagine if the chaos that ripped through Syria were to engulf Egypt, or God forbid, Nigeria. These are gigantic countries. This is not melodrama. We now know that people, when running from war, will risk the most treacherous journeys. Doctors, teachers tying their children to their chests as they tie themselves to floating corks and tin cans on the Mediterranean Sea, all for the promise of a better life. When you think of an exodus on that big a scale, you realize that we better have some big ideas to meet the challenge. And we do, and I'm really encouraged to sit here and hear them come from a bipartisan committee. These countries need aid, but it's not just aid. Commerce is urgent here. New trade agreements are critical. Concessional loans from the World Bank are essential. Dr. Jim Kim and the World Bank are really being innovative here. So is Gail Smith, who runs USAID. You should be proud of these people. Anti-corruption campaigners in our own office around the corner in the One campaign will tell you that the reforms necessary to qualify for the loans can be as important as the loans themselves. The Africa Development Bank has been right out in front on this stuff. President Akin Adesina understands that corruption kills more people than AIDS, TB and malaria combined. So tackling corruption has to be part of this package. In fact, he was also one of the first leaders to call for a modern Marshall Plan as a partnership for progress. So what might that mean? Well, the Marshall Plan, as America knows, was the first time the world witnessed development as security on a grand scale. The Marshall Plan was an idea big enough to meet the moment in history. It was an idea as big as the sacrifice Americans made in the fight for freedom, an idea that showed America could not only win the war, but the peace, as Lindsey Graham keeps reminding us. An idea big enough to change the world. An idea like the idea of America itself. You see, the peaceful Europe that I gratefully grew up in, the one that is so under threat right now, was born of the Marshall Plan. History's greatest example of national generosity as national security, which is what I'm talking about today. And I'm not alone. Trade and development as security. That's what Jim Jones is talking about today, and he's not alone. Senator Graham, not alone when he spoke to the Washington Post yesterday. It's the same thing. Finance Minister of Germany, Mr. Schäuble, not known for his wild pronouncements, has invoked this. King Abdullah of Jordan, the same. Actually, King Abdullah is worth thinking about, because he's a leader who's also a military man. It's not coincidence that he's a military man, because I think, I'm sure, military leaders, at least the great ones, know the cost of failure will ultimately be borne by them, by the men and women they lead into battle and have to face as they come home. This is a new century. These are new threats. This is politically very hard. I hope I understand the challenges. I hope I understand the pressures you face as leaders. But in truth, I probably don't. But I'll tell you what I do understand. I understand that America is not ready to give up on its greatness. And I'm not either. That's what got America to the moon. That's the spirit that brought mankind back to Earth when you signed up to fight the largest health disaster in the history of the world, HIV/AIDS. There were members on this subcommittee who refused to accept that AIDS was a problem that couldn't be solved. And since 2002, we now have nearly 9 million people who owe their lives to the US taxpayer. If you're a US taxpayer, you're an AIDS activist. Think about that. I'm here today to testify to the United States Senate that I have seen the impossible made possible right here in these halls. And we need that leadership again in this moment of great jeopardy. It is who you are. It is your essence and your calling. And when you serve history, you serve the people of America. And when you write history, we all live it. Thank you very much.
I want to begin by thanking the people of Washington, D.C. for hosting us, especially for putting up with more than 50 motorcades. And I will make one promise to the people of this city: I will not hold another one of these summits in another 6 years. I want to thank everyone who participated in our meetings, more than 50 leaders from every region of the world and key international organizations. As at our previous summits, we didn't just come here to talk, but we came here to act. I know that the very technical nature of nuclear security doesn't always make for flashy headlines, but over the past 6 years, we have made significant, meaningful progress in securing the world's nuclear materials so that it never falls into the hands of terrorists. And I want to take a few moments to step back and lay out exactly what we have accomplished. Together, we have removed the world's most deadly materials from nuclear facilities around the world. With Japan's announcement today, we've now removed or secured all the highly enriched uranium and plutonium from more than 50 facilities in 30 countries, more than 3.8 tons, which is more than enough to create 150 nuclear weapons. That's material that will never fall into the hands of terrorists. 14 nations and Taiwan, countries as diverse as Argentina and Chile to Libya and Turkey to Serbia and Vietnam, have now rid themselves entirely of highly enriched uranium and plutonium. In particular, I want to point out again that successfully removing all of Ukraine's highly enriched uranium 4 years ago meant that the very difficult situation in Ukraine over the past 2 years was not made even more dangerous by the presence of these materials. As of today, South America, an entire continent, is completely free of these dangerous materials. When Poland completes its removal this year, Central Europe will be free of them as well. When Indonesia completes its work this year, so will all of Southeast Asia. In other words, as terrorists and criminal gangs and arms merchants look around for deadly ingredients for a nuclear device, vast regions of the world are now off limits, and that is a remarkable achievement. We've made important progress in the United States as well. In addition to new steps I announced this morning, we've improved nuclear security and training. We've consolidated nuclear materials at fewer facilities, eliminated some 138 tons of our surplus highly enriched uranium, which would be enough for 5,500 nuclear weapons. Working with Russia, we're on track to eliminate enough Russian highly enriched uranium for about 20,000 nuclear weapons, which we are converting to electricity here in the United States. More specifically, as a result of these summits, every single one of the more than 50 nations represented here have taken concrete steps to enhance security at their nuclear facilities and storage sites, and that includes improved physical security, stronger regulations, abiding by international guidelines, greater transparency, and that includes international peer reviews. 15 new centers have been created around the world to promote nuclear security technologies and training, to share best practices. And as part of our work today, we agreed to keep strengthening our nuclear facilities' defenses against cyber attacks. We've bolstered international efforts to disrupt nuclear smuggling. The Proliferation Security Initiative has grown to more than 100 nations, including regular exercises to improve our collective ability to interdict shipments. The United States and 36 partner countries have worked to install radiation detection equipment at more than 300 international border crossings, airports, and ports, and we are developing new mobile detection systems as well. And finally, as I noted this morning, we've strengthened the treaties and international partnerships that are a foundation for so many of our efforts. So again, we have made significant progress, and everyone involved in this work, especially our teams who have worked tirelessly for years, can take enormous pride in our achievements. Nevertheless, as I said earlier, our work is by no means finished. There's still a great deal of nuclear and radioactive material around the world that needs to be secured. Global stocks of plutonium are growing. Nuclear arsenals are expanding in some countries with more small tactical nuclear weapons, which could be at greater risk of theft. And as a consequence, one of the central goals of this summit was how do we build on the work that has been done so that we have an international architecture that can continue the efforts even though this is the last formal Leaders Summit. So even as this is the last of those leader-level summits, today we agreed to maintain a strong architecture, including through the United Nations, the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Interpol, to carry on this work and to provide the resources and technical support that is needed to continue this mission. And we are creating a new nuclear security contact group, senior-level experts from more than 30 of our countries who will meet regularly to preserve the networks of cooperation we've built, to institutionalize this work, and to keep driving progress for years to come. At our session on ISIL this afternoon, there was widespread agreement that defeating terrorist groups like ISIL requires more information sharing. Everybody understands the urgency in the wake of what's happened in Brussels and Turkey, Pakistan, and so many other countries around the world. As a consequence, our Director of National Intelligence, Jim Clapper, is continuing to engage with intelligence leaders from a number of our European partners on deepening our cooperation. And today I invited all the nations represented at this summit to join a broader discussion among our intelligence and security services on how we can improve information sharing within and among our nations to prevent all manner of terrorist attacks, especially those that might involve weapons of mass destruction. In closing, I just want to say that preventing nuclear terrorism is one part of the broader agenda that I outlined 7 years ago in Prague, stopping the spread of nuclear weapons and seeking a world without them. In recent days, there's been no shortage of analysis on whether we've achieved our vision, and I'm the first to acknowledge the great deal of work that remains, from negotiating further reductions with Russia to dealing with North Korea's nuclear program. As I indicated in Prague, realizing our vision will not happen quickly, and it perhaps will not happen in my lifetime. But we've begun. The United States and Russian nuclear arsenals are on track to be the lowest that they have been in 6 decades. I've reduced the number and role of nuclear weapons in our nuclear security strategy. In a historic deal, we've prevented the spread of nuclear weapons to Iran. An international fuel bank is being built to promote civil nuclear cooperation. So I'm extremely proud of our record across the board, and we're going to keep pushing forward wherever we can, as I hope future administrations do, to bring us closer to the day when these nuclear dangers no longer hang over the heads of our children and our grandchildren. With that, let me take a few questions, and I'm going to start with Roberta Rampton of Reuters.
Thank you. I want to ask about Iran. And 3 weeks ago, Iran's supreme leader complained that his country has not been getting actual business deals since the nuclear agreement. And non-U.S. companies are saying that it's very hard or sometimes impossible to do much business with Iran without, at some point, accessing the U.S. financial system to do U.S. dollar-denominated transactions. So my question is, are you considering allowing such transactions? And if so, is that not a betrayal of your assurances that most U.S. sanctions would stay in place?
That's not actually the approach that we're taking. So let me say broadly that so long as Iran is carrying out its end of the bargain, we think it's important for the world community to carry out our end of the bargain. They have, in fact, based on the presentations that were made by the IAEA this morning to the P5+1, have, in fact, followed the implementation steps that were laid out. And as a consequence, sanctions related to their nuclear program have been brought down. Part of the challenge that they face is that companies haven't been doing business there for a long time, and they need to get comfortable with the prospects of this deal holding. One of the things that Secretary Liu and his counterparts within the P5+1 and elsewhere are going to be doing is providing clarity to businesses about what transactions are in fact allowed. And it's going to take time over the next several months for companies and their legal departments to feel confident that, in fact, there may not be risks of liability if they do business with Iran. And so some of the concerns that Iran has expressed, we are going to work with them to address. It is not necessary that we take the approach of them going through dollar-denominated transactions. It is possible for them to work through European financial institutions as well. But there is going to need to be continued clarification provided to businesses in order for deal flows to begin. Now, what I would say is also important is Iran's own behavior in generating confidence that Iran's a safe place to do business. In a deal like this, my first priority, my first concern was making sure that we got their nuclear program stopped and material that they already had that would give them a very short breakout capacity, that was shipped out. That has happened. And I always said that I could not promise that Iran would take advantage of this opportunity in this window to re-enter the international community. Iran so far has followed the letter of the agreement, but the spirit of the agreement involves Iran also sending signals to the world community and businesses that it is not going to be engaging in a range of provocative actions that might scare business off. When they launch ballistic missiles with slogans calling for the destruction of Israel, that makes businesses nervous. There is some geopolitical risk that is heightened when they see that taking place. If Iran continues to ship missiles to Hezbollah, that gets businesses nervous. And so part of what I hope happens is we have a responsibility to provide clarity about the rules that govern so that Iran can in fact benefit, the Iranian people can benefit from an improved economic situation. But Iran has to understand what every country in the world understands, which is businesses want to go where they feel safe, where they don't see massive controversy, where they can be confident that transactions are going to operate normally. And that's an adjustment that Iran's going to have to make as well. And frankly, within Iran, I suspect there are different views in the same way that there are hardliners here in the United States who, even after we certify that this deal is working, even after our intelligence teams, Israeli intelligence teams say this has been a game changer, are still opposed to the deal on principle. There are hardliners inside of Iran who don't want to see Iran open itself up to the broader world community and are doing things to potentially undermine the deal. And so those forces that seek the benefits of the deal, not just in narrow terms, but more broadly, we want to make sure that over time, they're in a position to realize those benefits. Okay. David Nakamura.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you mentioned at the beginning of your remarks, you just finished a working session with 50 world leaders about combating terrorism and groups like the Islamic State. And I wanted to ask you specifically about one of the strategies, prime strategies your administration is using in that effort. In the past several weeks, your administration has killed well over 200 people in airstrikes in Somalia, Libya, and Yemen, according to the Department of Defense. How can you be certain that all of the people killed pose an imminent threat to the United States? And why is the United States now killing scores of people at a time rather than eliminating individuals in very targeted strikes? Thank you.
You know, we have constructed a fairly rigid and vigorous set of criteria for us evaluating the intelligence that we receive about ISIL, where it might be operating, where al-Qaeda is operating. These guidelines involve a whole range of agencies consulting extensively and are then checked, double-checked, triple-checked before kinetic actions are taken. And for the most part, our actions are directed at high-value targets in the countries that you just described, outside of the theater of Iraq and Syria. In some cases, what we're seeing are camps that, after long periods of monitoring, becomes clear are involved in and directing plots that could do the United States harm, or are supporting ISIL activities or al-Qaeda activities elsewhere in the world. So if after a long period of observation we are seeing that, in fact, explosive materials are being loaded onto trucks and individuals are engaging in training in small arms, and there are some of those individuals who are identified as couriers for ISIL or al-Qaeda, then based on those evaluations, a strike will be taken. But what we have been very cautious about is making sure that we are not taking strikes in situations where, for example, we think there's the presence of women or children, or if it is in a normally populated area. And, you know, recently we laid out the criteria by which we're making these decisions. We declassified many elements of this. We are going to be putting forward and trying to institutionalize on a regular basis how we make these evaluations and these analyses. I think, in terms of the broader debate that's taken place, David, I think there's been in the past legitimate criticism that the architecture, the legal architecture around the use of drone strikes or other kinetic strikes wasn't as precise as it should have been, and there's no doubt that civilians were killed that shouldn't have been. I think that over the last several years, we have worked very hard to avoid and prevent those kinds of tragedies from taking place. In situations of war, we have to take responsibility when we're not acting appropriately, or where we've just made mistakes, even with the best of intentions. And that's what we're going to continue to try to do. And what I can say with great confidence is that our operating procedures are as rigorous as they have ever been, and that there is a constant evaluation of precisely what we do. Carol Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've spent 7 years now working on nonproliferation issues, and you said in your opening remarks that you hope the future administrations do the same and make it a priority. This week, one of the Republican frontrunner to replace you said that perhaps South Korea and Japan should have nuclear weapons and wouldn't rule out using nuclear weapons in Europe. Did that come up at this summit? And just generally, what message does it send when a major party candidate is articulating such a reversal in U.S. foreign policy? And also, who did you vote for in the Democratic primary?
Well, first of all, it's a secret ballot, isn't it? Oh, okay. All right. No, I'm not going to tell you now. What the statements you mentioned tell us? They tell us that the person who made the statements doesn't know much about foreign policy or nuclear policy or the Korean Peninsula or the world generally. It came up on the sidelines. I've said before that, people pay attention to American elections. What we do is really important to the rest of the world. Even in those countries that are used to a carnival atmosphere in their own politics, want sobriety and clarity when it comes to U.S. elections, because they understand the President of the United States needs to know what's going on around the world and has to put in place the kinds of policies that lead not only to our security and prosperity, but will have an impact on everybody else's security and prosperity. Our alliance with Japan and the Republic of Korea is one of the foundations, one of the cornerstones of our presence in the Asia-Pacific region. It has underwritten the peace and prosperity of that region. It has been an enormous boon to American commerce and American influence, and it has prevented the possibilities of a nuclear escalation and conflict between countries that in the past and throughout history have been engaged in hugely destructive conflicts and controversies. So you don't mess with that. It is an investment that rests on the sacrifices that our men and women made back in World War II when they were fighting throughout the Pacific. It is because of their sacrifices and the wisdom that American foreign policymakers showed after World War II that we've been able to avoid catastrophe in those regions. And we don't want somebody in the Oval Office who doesn't recognize how important that is. Andrew Beattie.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yesterday you met with President Erdogan of Turkey, hours after some fairly ugly scenes at the Brookings Institution. I was wondering, do you consider him an authoritarian?
Turkey is a NATO ally. It is an extraordinarily important partner in our fight against ISIL. It is a country with whom we have a long and strategic relationship with. And President Erdogan is someone who I've dealt with since I came into office. And in a whole range of areas, we've had a productive partnership. What is also true, and I have expressed this to him directly, so it's no secret that there are some trends within Turkey that I've been troubled with. I am a strong believer in freedom of the press. I'm a strong believer in freedom of religion. I am a strong believer in rule of law and democracy. And there is no doubt that President Erdogan has repeatedly been elected through a democratic process. But I think the approach that they've been taking towards the press is one that could lead Turkey down a path that would be very troubling. And, we are going to continue to advise them and I've said to President Erdogan, remind him that he came into office with a promise of democracy, and Turkey has historically been a country in which deep Islamic faith has lived side by side with modernity and an increasing openness, and that's the legacy that he should pursue, rather than a strategy that involves repression of information and shutting down democratic debate. Having said that, I want to emphasize the degree to which their cooperation has been critical on a whole range of international and regional issues, and will continue to be. And so, as is true with a lot of our friends and partners, we work with them, we cooperate with them, we are appreciative of their efforts, and there are going to be some differences. And where there are differences, we will say so, and that's what I've tried to do here. I'll take one last question. This young lady right there.
Thank you, President. Mr. President, what do you think?
Where are you from, by the way?
I am from Azerbaijan.
Okay.
How can Azerbaijan support in nuclear security issue?
Well, Azerbaijan, like many countries that participated, have already taken a number of steps, and each country has put forward a national action plan. There are some countries that had stockpiles of highly enriched uranium that they agreed to get rid of. There are other countries that have civilian nuclear facilities, but don't necessarily have the best security practices, and so they have adopted better security practices. There are countries that could potentially be transit points for the smuggling of nuclear materials, and so they've worked with us on border controls and detection. And because of Azerbaijan's location, it's a critical partner in this process. I should point out, by the way, that although the focus of these summits has been on securing nuclear materials and making sure they don't fall into the hands of terrorists, the relationships, the information sharing, the stitching together of domestic law enforcement, international law enforcement, intelligence, military agencies, both within countries and between countries. This set of relationships internationally will be useful not just for nuclear material, but it is useful in preventing terrorism generally. It's useful in identifying threats of chemical weapons or biological weapons. One of the clear messages coming out of this summit and our experiences over the last 7 years is an increasing awareness that some of the most important threats that we face are transnational threats. And so we are slowly developing a web of relationships around the world that allow us to match and keep up with the transnational organizations that all too often are involved in terrorist activity, criminal activity, human trafficking, a whole range of issues that can ultimately do our citizens harm. And seeing the strengthening of these institutions, I think, will be one of the most important legacies of this entire process. Mark Landler, since you had your hand up, I'll call on you one last question.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to ask a question about nuclear policy. Through these past 7 years, when you've pushed to rid the world of nuclear materials and fissile material, The U.S. nuclear industry has actually worked to improve miniaturization of warheads. And while it's not developed new classes of cruise missiles or warheads, it's worked to improve the technology. And that's prompted some in China and Russia to say, well, gee, we need to keep up. Are you concerned that the technological advances in the United States have had the effect of sort of undermining some of the progress you've made on the prevention side?
I think it's a legitimate question, and I am concerned. Here's the balance that we've had to strike. We have a nuclear stockpile that we have to make sure is safe and make sure is reliable. And after the START treaty, the START II treaty that we entered into with Russia, we have brought down significantly the number of weapons that are active. But we also have to make sure that they're up to date, that their command and control systems that might have been developed a while ago are up to snuff given all the technology that has changed since that time. And we have to make sure that our deterrence continues to work. And so even as we've brought down the number of weapons that we have, I've wanted to make sure that what we do retain functions, that it is not subject to a cyber intrusion, that there's sufficient confidence in the system that we don't create destabilizing activity. My preference would be to bring down further our nuclear arsenal. And after we completed START II, I approached the Russians, our team approached the Russians in terms of looking at a next phase for arms reductions. Because Mr. Putin came into power or returned to his office as president, and because of the vision that he's been pursuing of emphasizing military might over development inside of Russia and diversifying the economy, we have not seen the kind of progress that I would have hoped for with Russia. The good news is that the possibilities of progress remain. We are abiding by START II. We're seeing implementation. And although we are not likely to see further reductions during my presidency, my hope is that we have built the mechanisms and systems of verification and so forth that will allow us to continue to reduce them in the future. We do have to guard against, in the interim, ramping up new and more deadly and more effective systems that end up leading to a whole new escalation of the arms race. And in our modernization plan, I've tried to strike the proper balance, making sure that the triad and our systems work properly, that they're effective, but also to make sure that we are leaving the door open to further reductions in the future. But one of the challenges that we're going to have here is that it is very difficult to see huge reductions in our nuclear arsenal unless the United States and Russia, as the two largest possessors of nuclear weapons, are prepared to lead the way. The other area where I think we need to see progress is Pakistan and India, that subcontinent, making sure that as they develop military doctrines, that they are not continually moving in the wrong direction. And we have to take a look at the Korean Peninsula because the DPRK, North Korea, is in a whole different category and poses the most immediate set of concerns for all of us, one that we are working internationally to focus on, and that's one of the reasons why we had the trilateral meeting with Japan and Korea, and it was a major topic of discussion with President Xi as well. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good weekend.